Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and it's an honor to have as our guest this morning Dr. Ron Paul. What do we say about Ron Paul? The world's freedom leader. I mean, a man who's looked to not only in our own country, but all over the world as the champion of freedom and of peace and of prosperity. Ron, you've got, of course, many, many things going on in your life and some great announcements coming up. But I thought today we'd maybe start off with Edward Snowden. Isn't the hysteria against Snowden slightly surprising even for government people?
Yeah, I'm pretty shocked at how universal it is. I knew it would happen, and I knew he'd be, as a matter of fact, as soon as the story broke, I thought his life was even threatened. But still, if you look at the TV stations, it's really over the top. And, it makes our point about the two-party system and conservatives and liberals, which doesn't mean very much, because whether you go to the very, very conservative television stations or the very, very liberal ones, the story is all the same. That he is a monster, he has committed treason, and string him up. So it is really pretty wild on what they're doing. But I think most of it's, their embarrassment and letting the cat out of the bag. What was interesting to me also was the fact that when the story broke, most Americans were very concerned about it. They're spying on us and listening, and they didn't like this. And still, I'm sure the majority must be a little bit concerned about that. But then as soon as they couched it in patriotic terms and showed that he was a traitor and that he went and delivered the goods to our enemies, the Chinese and the Russians, they were able to turn that around. That's the power of the war propaganda and the military-industrial complex, how easy it is to change the sentiment. But there are more tools available to us now than there used to be. It used to be if the three majors said war is war and we must do it, they went and there was no opposition. Even though they have a tremendous sounding board with what they have, I think our ability to answer back to them is growing all the time.
Well, I found it interesting that in the early coverage of this, in order to attack him and to attack you, they kept pointing out that he'd been a donor to your 2012 presidential campaign. But shortly after they started that, the wall came down and they never mentioned it again. And yeah. I think it's because it helped him and it helped you.
Yeah, I was fascinated with that and I hadn't sorted it out, and that may be true. And I thought at first, it might be that they were afraid that, that they'd be over the top and going after me. But anyway, it did change, definitely. If you listen to the stories now, they never mention it. But you're right, at the beginning, they did. I think they wanted to, make me look bad by doing that. But hopefully the people that at least that we talked to weren't convinced.
Also, of course, it's traditionally espionage is giving, I don't know, the latest submarine plans to the North Koreans or whatever they were, or the Cubans or whatever. But of course, this is the crime of telling, as you've pointed out, of telling the American people about what the American government is secretly doing to them.
Yes, and, telling the American people is, if he gets charged, it must mean that they think we're the enemy. He told us what they're doing. He told us they're disobeying the Constitution and they're hurting us, and that they're fraud. They're fraudulent when they say that they're fighting these wars to protect our Constitution and protect our liberties. At the same time, it's unconstitutional to fight the wars, and it's unconstitutional saying, that they should violate the Fourth Amendment. They're doing a great deal of harm. So we must be the enemy, according to them, if they can charge him with espionage, because nobody has really, on TV, they even are cautious when they want to say, well, he's committed treason. Well, he might have, or he probably has, and he has, who knows what he has, and who knows what he gave to, China and what he gave to the Russians. So they know that they have no proof of that, but they're working very hard to move the propaganda against him.
No, and of course, and this, as you say, and Glenn Greenwald has pointed this out too, that they want all the focus on the evil Snowden and not on the evil government. I mean, we're not supposed to pay any attention to what the NSA, and I guess he's got far more stuff about what the government is doing to us than we know so far, and I hope he releases every single drop of data he's got. But we're not supposed to think about that we're supposed to entirely ignore that and just be for chopping off the head of Snowden, or, as you pointed out early on, perhaps hitting him with a drone.
You know, if we're to have government, it's supposed to be very limited, and the purpose is to protect our liberties. But right now, it's the conventional wisdom that government is there to protect power. And this is what they do. If governments get into trouble, rarely do they get into big trouble. I knew a few people in Congress that went to prison, but it had to do with they were the most outspoken people against the IRS, and they're the ones that had the infraction. But think of what happened at Kent State, what happened at Ruby Ridge, what happened with the Davidians in Waco. I mean, there was some pretty serious killing going on by the government. But to my knowledge, I don't think any of the government officials were ever punished. And the Davidians, a lot of them went to jail, you know, even though children, 24 kids were killed and 54 adults. But those people, sometimes even those who were involved got promoted. Just like the IRS agents right now, you know, look at what they've done to us, and they're getting huge bonuses. So it's turned on its head. Instead of protecting the people, then when you have a whistleblower come out and risk all and tell us the truth, like the CIA agent that not too long ago told us, you know what, the Americans are torturing people at Guantanamo. Oh, they are? Well, that's very bad. We shouldn't do that. That's bad publicity. So they investigate it, and he goes to prison.
Yeah.
For telling the truth. I mean, that is so disgusting. I keep hoping that more and more people will wake up and, you know, with the work you do and others, I think we are reaching people. But right now, you know, even though I can put a positive interpretation of what's happening, I also realize that what we see outside of Washington, you can look at in a positive way, especially, you know, when I talk to the young people. At the same time, if you go to Washington, there's not much to get excited about, except that they're locked in on this. And I think what I believe is that we're in a transition, because eventually the ideas rule. So we have to change the ideas of people so that then there is almost like an automatic reflection of what's going on in Washington. And of course, Nixon was right, both in the foreign policy as well as in economics. We're all Keynesians now. We're all interventionists now. And it's true. And I think this whole story here, where it's almost universal that everybody, you know, it's related to government or the media is now, you know, attacking Snowden.
Ron, I noticed that the Dow Jones has been going down recently. I noticed that interest rates are going up a little bit recently. Do you think this marks a change, if not an end, to the Fed's ability to run everything the way they would like to be running things?
There's no way to be, you know, positive about that. But that was my assessment, you know, a couple of months ago, that they've lost control. It was last August, 10-year bond hit 1.39, and that looks like it may well be the bottom. And it's been down pretty steady and sharply. I think they bumped up a little just recently, but yes, I think they've lost control, and they're very powerful. But I do believe markets are stronger than even governments. That's one thing on our side. And you recall, I'm sure, very clearly how they manipulated the price of gold when they claimed it was $35 an ounce.
Yes.
and even now, I'm sure there's a lot of manipulation going on. But, you know, the commodities market might knock the markets down, but then you can't find the gold coins to buy. And you have this President's Working Group on Financial Markets, the team that's supposed to get together. I'm sure they're busy and they're frantic, and they can change things to a degree, but eventually, you know, once they start dumping. Matter of fact, I think, I don't know the precise statistic, but I know the bond market is much bigger than stock market. So when people realize there are no more profits on betting interest rates will go down, how can you bet on lower interest rates when they're zero? You know, so if they decide they're moving up and they start dumping bonds, and then there's a rout, it'll be more like what happened in the 70s when they threw in the towel and said, we can't keep gold at $35 an ounce. And then it wasn't too long that it shot up, you know, to over $800. So I think that will happen to the bonds, but it's the kind of thing that I don't think anybody knows, and I don't do trading and things, so I wouldn't bet that, you know, that I could make a bundle by betting this is going to happen, short bonds at this moment. because who knows what will happen. It might happen in 3 months. It might happen in 6 months or 2 years from now, for that matter. But I think we're getting awfully close. I don't think you're ever going to see 10-year bonds down to 1.5% again.
Ron, should we be concerned that the dollar price of gold has gone down?
Well, I think if you're in the commodities market, I bet you that there's a little bit, but that wasn't part of my philosophy, because I figured that I didn't have the nerves of steel that some people have. But there are some good, and there's some good Austrian economists that, look at markets and they can do that. But I think if you're a true gold bug, and we've heard from a few of those in the financial markets say, hey, this is a good deal. We know what's going to happen long term. So I've been wanting to buy a little bit more, and 1,800 seemed to be a little high. They're saying this is the time you're supposed to go out and buy. And our friend Bert Blumbert, I think you recall what he said. He said, don't worry about the price of gold. He says, how many ounces you have? Do you think you have some more? Another thing that Bert taught us was, he says, if you're thinking, he certainly wasn't a trader. He knew how to protect himself on the short run if he's making trades. But he always said, if you have some money right now and you're thinking about buying gold and silver, he always said, if you have the money now and you think so, don't think that next week what the price is going to be, because it might be much higher. Yeah, it might be a little lower and you'll luck out. But he just said to sort of buy it when you're ready and not try to anticipate that you'll know exactly. Now, that's exactly opposite advice if you happen to be astute enough to know how to trade the commodity futures, which I don't get involved in.
No, and of course, Bert, obviously, I think Bert was exactly right. And of course, there are people who are able to anticipate the markets. There are professional speculators, people who have those kinds of talents to know when to buy and when to sell. But that's not most of us.
No, that's the few. So, but and a lot of times, I think there are people, that understand economics from our viewpoint. And then there's an announcement that the CPI did such and such. And they know the CPI doesn't mean anything. But they also know that most people in the marketplace think it means something. So they might say, they announced that the CPI did such and such, so I'm going to base my next move on the fact that the majority are still thinking erroneously that it means something else. So it is this perceptions, but that's the way markets work. There is this psychological impact. But the Austrian investor has to be a little more cautious, because I think the tendency of many of us who follow Austrian economics are more fundamentalist than the traders, But there certainly are some good Austrian economists that do pretty darn well doing both.
Ron, two of your latest projects, I notice, elicited a lot of anger and really fury and very nasty comments from the neoconservatives and just the statists in general, which, of course, is a great endorsement for you. That's your homeschool curriculum and the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Would you talk to us a little bit about both those things?
Yes. There is going to be a book coming out in September on homeschooling. For many, many years, even in the early 80s when I was first in Congress, I thought that, someday I'm going to be more relaxed and I'll be out of this Congress. And I think the most important thing I could do is to run a school. And there was an Episcopal priest here in Houston, Robert Ingram, who had a private school.
Great guy.
And it was considered to be a very good school. And I thought, he's doing a great service. I thought maybe I'd do something like that. Well, it didn't work that way. I was in and out of Congress and did other things. But lo and behold, with the development of technology now, with help of others and advice of others, I have devised a curriculum and a program which will become available in the fall. And this is a curriculum that is going to be around what I've been talking about, the economics, sound economics, an interpretation of history, which is different than what the statists give us. All the great presidents are the warmongers, I would like to think that maybe Ivan Eland has a better approach to rating our presidents with restructuring amounts much more. So that is coming, and I'm looking forward to that, because every day we read in the newspaper some atrocious thing that happened, in public school. And I never set out to attack public schools, mainly because I was a product of them. Schools were different. In local school, there was a time when the senior official would be your neighbor who was on the school board. You didn't have the state or the federal government or courts or anything else involved. But today it is so different. I mean, because, so much government is involved, the public school system has deteriorated, and this is the reason there's a fertile field out there. And there's a lot of good programs already, but they're different. The program I've devised is not meant to be, a fundamentalist Christian program, and it's not going to be a Catholic program, but I wanted to appeal to fundamentalists and libertarians and be as objective as I can make it, because, it's not too difficult to make mathematics objective and biology objective. It's not history. History, you'll get more challenges because you're challenging the status quo, but there's no reason why you can't defend our view of objectivity in history. And I love the subject of geography, and I want to interject that so people, when they get sent off to war, they don't even know where they're going. They don't even ask any questions. So that is exciting, and I think the way it's moving should be successful. But also, Daniel McAdams, who did my foreign policy for so many years in Washington, who is really, really involved and very capable on following foreign affairs. So he's heading that up with me. It's called the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Because if over the years, and you've known me for a long time, how much I have more than ever brought the two together, foreign policy and monetary policy and economics. It used to be, okay, matter of fact, in one of the debates I made fun of it, and they said, well, we're going to talk about foreign policy tonight. We don't want to get into economics. I said, well, how do you do that? And I said, you can't do that. It costs money. You monetize it. You inflate. You regulate. You destroy civil liberties. And you want to talk about foreign policy. What they wanted to talk about was how many troops should we send here, or where should we move them to? That sort of thing. So this whole principle of peace and prosperity, I mean, if you want prosperity, you have to have peace. And the one notion that I work hard to refute is this notion that the liberals have said for so long, and I still hear it. I can't believe it. They still say, well, we got out of the Depression because we got into World War II. And I happen to be able to remember World War II. I'll tell you what, we were pretty depressed at that time. There were no automobiles. There was rationing. We didn't have meat on the table. There were a lot of things going on. So we didn't get out of the Depression. And I think the malinvestment and the debt was all liquidated by the end of the war, and we were able to go back to scratch and start growing again.
Ron, there's a very interesting column out from Michael Gerson, who's a Neocon writer for the Washington Post. He was George Bush's chief speechwriter, and not a friend of yours and of the liberty movement. And he says today that really there's too much Jeffersonianism in this country. That's the word he uses. He says there's too much Jeffersonianism. People are disliking the federal government. He said, so what do we do about that? Well, he says clearly we need so-called national service. And he has a horrible quote from the evil CIA agent Bill Buckley promoting this. But he says we need to have every 18-year-old has to spend time with any of one of the military services or a civilian bureaucracy. This will unite the nation. This will get rid of that horrible Jeffersonianism. That'll make people love the federal government. So, the neocons are advocating, of course, temporary slavery for young people. And I always love the fact that you would point out, why is this just the 18-year-olds? Why do we send Gerson over to Iraq? I mean, he can peel potatoes or something, right?
Matter of fact, he could drive a truck, too.
That's right.
That's what they need to do. And I had another suggestion, which will never come about, is those individuals who vote to support war, even without a declaration, vote for the money, they ought to be sent over there to do the job. Instead, we entice these poor people to join up and get involved, and then they have all this guilt to live with because they realize how senseless this killing is and how immoral it is. And now we have an epidemic of suicides of our veterans that come back. It just blows my mind to think that we're losing 22 veterans per day, with suicide after they've been over there. And some people suggest, well, they shouldn't have gone. They should have known better. They volunteered. I'm a little more sympathetic of that. I think the real problem is embedded in ideas, ideological support for war, the military-industrial complex, and then the people allowing these groups to run our government. Eventually, the people have to finally stand up and say that we don't want these kind of people running our lives and running this foreign policy the way they do. But I guess there's a little bit of responsibility goes around. I just come down so hard on the people who give us our policies. I mean, that's the end point. Those are the neoconservatives. The neoconservatives are the real culprits in all that's happening today.
Well, Ron, thanks for leading the fight against the neoconservatives and against the statists and against the money manipulators and the statists all across the board. And we're looking forward to more great things from the homeschool curriculum and from the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity and all your other efforts. And of course, there are big efforts to come. They're going to make international news, so we're looking forward to that. And keep it up.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, Lew.
Bye-bye, Ron. Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.